Sorry, we can take a step back and do that again.
I'm gonna take a break. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Ex-girlfriend walking?
no.
What is
I felt animal in the zoo feeling
Oh yeah.
a little bit.
Were people looking at us?
Maybe they were.
I didn't even notice.
I don't know. Okay. Try again.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Design Exchange. Today with me is my good friend Dan Walton.
Hello.
Hey Dan.
Yep. We've known each other a long time, but it's been a while.
It's been a while. Dan has a long history in creative endeavors and startups.
That's true.
Also, I can edit any of this.
Sure.
It's not a live stream like Joe Rogan.
No, that's good.
Can edit the shit out of this.
No, we can be live. Let's be live.
Can be live.
Yeah, no editing. No nets.
No nets, no safety nets.
So what do you normally like to talk about on the show? I've not seen the show yet.
Yeah, there's not been any published episodes yet.
Okay.
I'm going to die.
So it's okay that I don't know.
Go to the grave with an archive of interviews.
Well, I hear for podcasting, they recommend that you actually make like 7 shows and then release them. That way, if you miss a week, you have a buffer.
Yeah.
And that way you don't like beat yourself up too bad because like consistency is really important.
I've heard that you should release 3 shows at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then, I've been recording episodes so that I'll be able to release 3 and then release 1 a week, even if I missed a week or something.
Right. Yeah. You always want a buffer because just consistency is super critical. Because once you have like some fans, they want to get in the habit of listening to it. I did a podcast project. I'm still working on it called cast.market. And we have a search engine for all the shows and we track their popularity. So as soon as you launch, we'll index your show and you'll be able to track if you're popular in Vietnam or in Columbus, or be able to track your sort of analytics.
Is this like is this a standalone website or an app? Or
you can just go to cast.market and you can see all the shows and see like the frequency at which they release their shows and where in the world people are listening. Turns out some of the most popular shows are language learning because it's a completely free way to learn English. And like there are billions of people all over the world that want to learn English, and this is the cheapest way to do it.
We are sitting in a bar, but it's also a co-working space. Right?
That's true. Yeah. So it's 3 things. It's a bar and it's a pierogi restaurant and it's a co-working space. So all 3 things. And it's here in Columbus in the old Max and Irma's in German Village. And that's where I'm working these days.
Before moving back to Columbus, you lived in San Francisco for like 15 years?
Yeah, I lived there for a long time. I first moved out to Northern California for a few years to work on a new company, and then I moved down into San Francisco to do all sorts of stuff.
Let's quickly let people know like some of the apps that you've released in the past.
Right. So when the App Store launched, we released an app called Recorder, which ended up being either top 1 or 2 selling app. We were one of the first at the time. At the launch of the App Store, the prices were $5 and $10, and we were like the first ones to realize that you really wanted to price things at like $1 because popularity was more important than your price, really, because popularity drove more and more downloads because of the way the charts worked. So we were part of that whole thing and saw that unroll and saw how Apple did it, and learned a lot from that, and went on to make music creation products. So we made we did the Rebirth port. So we ported Propellerhead's Rebirth to the iPhone and the iPad later on. The iPad version is beautiful. I think it's really great. The iPhone version is pretty good. But at the time, we didn't know whether the iPhone had enough power to do Rebirth. We suspected it did, but we didn't know until I was able to play the demo song out of a iPhone 1, and it was amazing to hear that old cheesy tune come out of the iPhone. And we knew at that point that it was possible. So I worked for about 2 months without even knowing if it would be possible. And there was no way to know. Like I couldn't. There was no way to know what, because the the iPhone, you never really knew how much power you had. You never really knew how much memory you had because Apple kind of locked that stuff away from you. And so, and then there wasn't like, if I spent the time benchmarking it like on a PC or something, it doesn't even really translate that well. So truthfully, I had to spend like 2 months porting it, and then before I knew that it was even going to be possible. It was an archaeology project. It was super cool.
Oh, and for those who don't know what Reason was, that Reason?
Well, this is Rebirth. So Rebirth is there's these 4 instruments, and it's a 808, a 909, and a 303. Well, then actually Rebirth has 2 303s. So those are the instruments for acid techno, which is a genre of music. And if you put those instruments together in any configuration, they always make acid techno. So
Right.
so Rebirth is awesome because like you can sit down and anyone can literally turn the knobs and create something, and it's always going to be acid techno. It's always going to be dance music, and you can't not make dance music with it. It was wildly popular. It was like the equivalent of Doom for the music industry. Doom is this video game that like forever changed what our perceptions of video games can be, and Rebirth was the same way. And just like Doom and even Minecraft had all these people who would mod it, people would mod Rebirth like crazy. There are all these different skins, and people would tweak the sounds and circuit bend it and all this stuff. So it's awesome to be a part of that.
And that's after that, you guys you've done a lot of projects for existing synth brands,
Yes.
as well as additional synths. Actually, I want to take a step back quickly. What's one of the things I think is interesting about you is as a child, your mom's a music teacher, your dad's an electrical engineering teacher, professor.
Right.
So you have both a technical and a musical and artistic upbringing.
Yeah.
Right. And
That's
then
right.
kind of those two things dovetailed together into what is maybe most of your career so far.
Right.
Which is like audio software.
Yeah, that's right. Most of my time has been spent making audio software. And the idea to me is that an instrument is the ultimate combination of art and technology. And the reason why I think that, most people think of instruments as these sort of like old things, but a piano was once very high tech, and a violin was once high tech as well. And an instrument requires a certain amount of science and a certain amount of art in order to have it all come together. The visuals of an instrument matter, but they're not you wouldn't want to sacrifice the performance for the visual characteristic, but instruments are beautiful. So anyway, it's a combination of design, art, and technology, but they're also a combination of culture, because an instrument won't come into any kind of popularity until people start using it to write music with it. And so it all has to kind of come together. You got to combine culture, art, science, technology. It's like the ultimate combination of all of these really challenging fields. So I've always been very fascinated in like what it takes to make them, and and their impact on art and science.
Let me help plug some of
Right.
the
So
projects for the last 10 years.
yeah. So I can talk. I mean, we did the Rebirth stuff with propeller heads, and then we did iMPC with Akai. An iMPC is a iPhone and iPad version of MPC. An MPC, just like the 303 and the 808 and the 909 made acid techno, the MPC made hip hop. Now, the creator of each of these instruments never knew that they would create musical genres with their instrument. They were always trying to create, just like sort of the modern technology movement has about doing things faster and easier. The 303 was originally made so that you wouldn't have to hire a bassist. You could play your guitar, and the 303 was a bass simulator. It didn't sound like a bass, especially if you put some filters on it. But and the 808 and 909 were meant so that you didn't have to hire a drummer. So these were not designed to make techno originally. No one knew that techno would come about because of these things. MPC likewise created hip hop, and again, it was designed to be a drum machine. But because of the ability to sample phrases in music, the idea was you could go and sample any drums you wanted and then replay them. But that's not what hip hop did. Hip hop did use the drums, but then they also sampled phrases from classic music and weave them into their beats, and that created what we know of rap and hip hop now. So the MPC was the beginning of that. So we brought the MPC to the iPhone and iPad. Previously, an MPC would cost you like $1,000 or something. It'd be an expensive instrument, but now you can have it in your pocket for like $3. And we thought that was pretty cool.
Do you think that a company like Akai has any worries that their software application will cannibalize their hardware sales?
I don't know. I mean, I think they probably just see the mobile stuff as a way to get their legend and legacy out to as many people as possible. So there's no one. I don't think any. The desktop hardware is going to be more powerful and have more sort of capabilities than the mobile products. So I don't think there's any worry about that.
There's also a certain tactile feel to the hardware sense that you might not get on an iPad screen.
Oh yeah, I mean you can add controllers. Yeah, I mean Akai's a partner of ours. They've been great, and it's been. I think we have a really good thing going. I mean we're sort of the mass market, super accessible mobile version of their studio gear.
Before we move past music tools completely, you guys have built a lot of in-house products as well, right?
So we've ported the Arturia has a very nice mini Moog emulator for software for PCs, and so we've got a mobile version of that, which is really nice. We have a audio loops and samples marketplace and interchange system called Audio Copy. It's also an editor. It's free. It's awesome. We have a system called Tabletop, which is a pile of instruments that you can wire up and make music with. Essentially one-stop shop for all your music needs. We've got all the different tools: samplers, synthesizers, drum machines, sequencers.
What do you think if an artist was interested to make music using iPads, would they be better off using an all-in-one system like Tabletop, or having maybe several iPads and using more standalone things?
I think it all depends. I mean, artists each find their own favorite instruments, is what I find. Like if you're a guitarist, you find your favorite guitar, or it finds you, and that's going to be your instrument that you're going to, be inspired by, and you're going to learn to play. You might have a couple of guitars, but the point is that every creative musician finds their own thing. And we see tons and tons of sort of the younger generation just completely making tracks on their iPhones because that's what they have. They don't, they don't want to go out and buy a notebook just so they can do music. So they have a phone, so they download music apps and write beats and rap and create videos and all sorts of stuff. I think that's what the younger generation is definitely doing.
I remember talking to Zach, one of your partners in the Retronyms, years ago.
Yeah.
And I was asking about, hey, are you going to ever bring these things to Android?
Right.
And at the time, Android certainly wasn't up to the task in terms of audio latency and stuff. Right. Has that changed?
Not really. There's a lot of things about Android that make it difficult. There's technical things which could be overcome, but then there's business model things. So the music creation fans are on iPhones. So that's one thing. So the density is higher. Also, they're more likely to pay for things, and our business model is sell software. We're not, we don't have an advertising-based business. We got to have some revenue stream, so we sell the software, and Android's less likely to do that. I think that the business model is more serious than the technical problems. If someone came up with a business model that involved music creation that didn't require that you sold the apps, then you would want to have it on both Android and iOS. So if you came up with like an Instagram, but for music, you'd do it on both. But if you're going to make apps and sell them, you can avoid a bunch of technical headaches and a bunch of design limitations that Android provides in the audio space. and just do iOS. And that's what we've been doing. Now we port to Android now and then, but so far we've been trying to focus on iOS.
And then what is the wedge?
So always wanted to build a hardware project and also recognize some musical limitations of the iPad. And those limitations were related to how you connect hardware devices. So the way you would connect musical hardware to iPads was through an adapter that was also your charge port. So, there's these little USB adapters for iPads, and you can connect a MIDI device to those, but you can't charge while you're doing that. And so we developed a Bluetooth device, and right around the same time, a new MIDI standard came out that supported this Bluetooth link, which meant that it had to be really low latency and it had to be acceptable for musicians. So we said, hey, let's make a USB adapter for Bluetooth so that people can connect their musical instruments to their iPad or musical control surfaces to their iPad. And but let's not stop there. Let's do some crazy bright lights and a sort of a light show so that if you're on stage, or if you're aspiring to be on stage, or if you just like the idea of combining crazy lights with it has like 48 super bright full color LEDs, and you can control them from your phone or your iPad, and they synchronize with the music, and so you can sort of like do a stage performance, or even on YouTube it looks cooler than just like plunking away on your iPad. So it's sort of this like combo device that we made, and it's a silicon surface, so it won't slip if you put your iPad on it. And we did a Kickstarter and sold a bunch, made a bunch, and some of the components that we used to build it are now unavailable. So we have to kind of redesign it in order to build it again, and maybe we will, maybe we won't. It just hasn't been decided yet.
Is there any inventory left?
There may be, but I think it's basically sold out. We made 2 runs, and we only expected to sell the first one, but we ended up selling through both, which is pretty cool. I actually, now that we're talking about it, like I'm getting excited about like maybe redesigning it, but yeah, it was really stressful. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
If you did a new one, would you make an iPad Pro sized one also?
Maybe. I mean, this one worked fairly well for iPad Pro. It wasn't like the iPad Pro would fall off if you're tapping the iPad Pro. It worked pretty well. So yeah, maybe make it a little bigger. I think one thing that you learn about hardware is that the price is often dictated by the size. So bigger objects are more expensive for everybody, and they're heavier, which also means they're more expensive. So the price of something is related to its size and its weight.
Especially when you're talking about materials, the cost of material and also the cost of shipping.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I try to think about is like, what can you stuff a lot of really amazing software into that's also very small? And that's like an idea, because you can create a lot of value that way by putting a whole bunch of amazing software in something small, because small is inexpensive. And
that's kind of what an iPhone is.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's true. I mean, the iPhone is probably less expensive to manufacture than any notebook computer, like any notebook computer, even cheap ones, because it's so small.
And they've got such high volumes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, technology is not what's expensive, it's the size. Size is what I see as a constraining aspect. You have to pay more, you have to pay a premium for the latest greatest, but it isn't inherently, like especially over time when it isn't the latest, it isn't inherently more expensive.
You could have like a cinder block, and that would be big and heavy and cheap.
And expensive. And if you want to ship it across the country, I mean,
Yeah, the shipping for it would be expensive.
Yeah.
But the material cost wouldn't necessarily be expensive.
You're right. The material cost isn't anything, and there's no software in it or anything, and there's a whole industry to ship those things around. But yeah,
They don't normally ship one at a time. That's the thing. You
Right.
ship a whole truck bed of cinder blocks or
Right.
something.
Right. The rule of big and heavy is what creates the cost of something is just an estimate. It's not completely true.
Oh.
It's just, but it's something to think about when designing products, because there's a lot of truth to it.
But sometimes the converse is true too, because if you look at what you can accomplish in a desktop in terms of price per performance versus a laptop, which has much greater thermal constraints,
Right. Right.
You're sometimes paying a premium for having power in a small package.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true too.
Medium,
Yeah.
like Goldilocks.
Yes.
The Goldilocks zone of medium size technology at medium power.
Yeah, there you go. That's probably the smart way.
Medium amount of powerful apps.
Yeah, exactly. We should talk about another favorite subject of mine, which is where to live and work.
Sure.
And
Are you a Columbus native?
Yes.
So grew up in Columbus, Ohio.
Right.
Moved out to San Francisco as
Right.
part of the gold rush.
I wouldn't say that. I think that I always was fascinated by San Francisco and the Bay and all that. But I was recently thinking back to like when I moved out there, and I originally moved out to the country in California, and I didn't like I wasn't trying to get to Silicon Valley. I was just trying to work on some cool things. And I didn't move to the city because I wanted to. I moved there because of some other factors. It wasn't like a dream of mine. But when I was there, I did love it, and I lived there while before Uber and before Salesforce and all that stuff was just first few lines of software. When I was there, not at all.
I'm kind of curious. You've lived in a few places. Originally from Columbus, Ohio, moved to Northern California, including the countryside and San Francisco.
Yeah.
And now after many years there, you've relocated back to Columbus, Ohio.
Right.
So, like, what do you like about living and working in both these places, and
Right.
what do you dislike about both of the places?
Right. Yeah. So I think that it's difficult to do creative work in certain cities. And it's because of the they're sort of like an aggressive attitude in a lot of cities. And it's hard to be creative in that. It's not even just economics either. It's just everyone around you is very aggressively pursuing something. And it makes it difficult to actually sit and think and work creatively. And that's why there aren't that many like rock bands in San Francisco or New York anymore. It's why the sort of creative side of things is happening elsewhere. And I think that's the main thing that I don't like about living in a city, is that you end up with a lack of variety or diversity of the types of people that live there.
Do you think when you first moved to San Francisco, there was more creative stuff happening?
Yeah. So San Francisco used to be like San Francisco is always changing, and that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And it's an amazing place. I love it. But when I moved there, it wasn't a place for large companies. It was a place for small companies and startups, and a lot of creativity, a lot of wild ideas. And then if you had some success, you would often move down south. And then now those companies now blew up down south, and they're moving up to the city. And so now there's like, Salesforce and Uber and stuff like right in San Francisco. And it's fine. It's just that, again, it drives out some of the creativity in some ways, or some of the pursuits that aren't entirely financial. Like if your pursuit is like, I want to see if I can build something that really appeals to me, or some idea that I have, and isn't all like driven by some market thing. It's difficult to build that kind of stuff in a city these days. People don't understand it as well.
And then is Columbus more suited for that then?
I think so. It can be. I mean, I think that, I've been working really hard on trying to create really big ideas here in Columbus. Like Ethics, which is this blockchain project I'm working on, is a very big idea around decentralized trade. And it's something that I think is like a really, really huge idea, and it's really aggressive. But that isn't always the best thing to be working on. Sometimes there are other pursuits, and it's good to have lots of people around you that are pursuing lots of things. And Columbus has a big variety. I mean, I've got some friends here that are very involved in creating amazing music and arts scenes and spaces and lifestyles that make this place awesome.
In a couple words, what's your favorite and least favorite part of San Francisco and of Columbus?
That's tough. I think my favorite thing about San Francisco is it's super beautiful, and it's got mountains and the ocean and all the activities that come with that. The skiing, the sailing, the surfing, the hiking is just out of this world amazing. And then the worst thing is it's a super grind, and there's a tremendous amount of traffic. So and the traffic's bad because it's hard to get to those mountains and oceans, and you have to deal with it. Now you can schedule and deal with it, but it's a lot. Columbus, the best thing about it is that it's super convenient and super low key. There's a huge variety in the kinds of things you can do, but and there's no nonsense. Like you're never in a 2-hour traffic jam, but it doesn't have mountains and oceans and that kind of thing. In
the stairwell of your
Yes.
co-working space, there's it looks quite a vintage poster.
Yes.
That says Ohio skiing.
Yeah, it says Ski Ohio.
Ski Ohio, and then it's got a man like tucked in a racing tuck, but he's just on a flat cornfield.
He's on a cornfield. Yeah, that's right. That's it's muddy riverbanks and flat. Everything's flat. Sticks, trees. Terrible weather in comparison to other places, but a lot of really awesome things in terms of what people do here. You have to kind of make it great, and that's like, it's not just great because we have an ocean or a mountain. It's great because there are people doing all sorts of really cool things here.
When we were in high school, Columbus felt quite vibrant in terms of some of the art and rave scenes.
Yes, completely.
And I think I've even had conversations with you about this in the past. Like, part of the reason why it seemed so vibrant at the time is because there wasn't really anything to do.
Yeah.
So, like, people sitting around saying, this kind of sucks. What can we do to make it better?
Yeah.
And then trying to make something and making a scene.
Yeah.
But a lot of those people, us included, left.
Yeah.
Went to Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York after they finished high school or finished university to try to chase the thing that they had already made.
I mean, I never found it anywhere else, and it may have been there, but I didn't find quite what we had here in terms of the vibrancy or the there's stuff. I mean, there's stuff elsewhere. It's different, so maybe that's part of it. But yeah, I think it's a good point.
Do you have any time these days for writing music?
I think about. I mean, one of the things that happened to me is that, like, once I started creating all the music software I didn't want to sit in front of someone else's music software. And I didn't want to sit in front of my own because that felt too much like work. I needed a break from what I was doing for the last 8 hours. So it meant that I couldn't really write music. Now, I would pick up an acoustic guitar and fiddle with that and write some songs and play some other people's songs. And that was fun. But I haven't written music in a long time. I might someday, but not.
So how do you spend your off hours?
Like going for a walk or a hike, cooking, it's different every day. I've got a bunch of family here, so I'll see the family, hanging out with my wife, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Simple stuff.
You think your brother will stay in San Francisco, or he'll come back to here?
I mean, his wife is very involved in the design community. She runs a design organization, and it's awesome. She does a really great job, and it's very San Francisco based. So I think that'll keep him in the city.
What do you find exciting these days?
I think that I think I still, personally, like what I'm interested in is I'm still interested in building things and the sort of creative process and like building products and shipping different tools and giving people things that allow them to do things they couldn't have done before. That to me is really exciting. Like going from, yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing I think a lot about. That's what I work on, every day. So
Last time I was in Columbus a year ago, your main thing was ETHEX, ETHEX,
ethics.
Yeah. But ETHEX.
Yeah. This is still my main thing. Like I'm still focused on this every day. Over the last month, I spent a lot of time looking at like other types of work and other types of possibilities, but ethics is still my main focus.
How would you describe ethics?
Ethics is a way for any two people to swap digital assets without any intermediaries. And it's built upon Ethereum smart contracts. But essentially the company is interested in decentralized trade because we think that eventually worldwide trade needs to be more decentralized. It will improve the economy for the world. And the reason is that there's friction every time you move an asset through a country into another country. It's like, why do we should have companies that are more global and rather than companies that are sort of localized to different jurisdictions. And it's the internet age, right? That means that internet companies should have more of a global stance than a local stance. And so decentralized trade helps to bring that about.
Do you think that, and currently with companies, if you want a company, you have to establish it somewhere, right? You have to register it as a company in some country.
Yes.
And then you have multinationals, which they probably have their nominal headquarters in a tax haven, and then they have branch offices in many countries. And we have this kind of, if you listen to politics on either side of the aisle,
right,
you end up having topics about like companies not necessarily paying their fair share of taxes in the first place, but also like regulations. If you want to do manufacturing within this country, you have to follow these environmental standards, for instance.
Right. Well, so given kind of the idea here of like what a company is, I think that right now in the world, let's get sci-fi, right? In the world we live in, a company is a structure that's a piece of a nation. So the nation provides a structure for people to work together in the form of either a corporation or an LLC or a 501c3 nonprofit or whatever. Political action.
Kind of old world.
This is what we're at now.
Right.
Yeah, this is how it's set up now. But I look at projects like the thing that I think about is like look at projects like Linux. There wasn't really a company Linux. It was a movement of people, and it achieved tremendous things during its day, and still powers the world around us. It's what your iPhone's made of. It's what Google was made of. It's the sort of premise to all the tech companies, Amazon. And so, but Linux wasn't a company. And so how did it exist and how did it have so much influence? And the reason why is because it was a set of shared ideals and incentives. And I think that's a more powerful thing than any company. And so the question is, how do you establish and track? The thing that Linux never solved was like, how do you really establish and track how much people have contributed or how much value people have contributed to a system and a system of values and ideas? How do you track people's contributions to that? And I don't think we know yet, but I believe we'll find it one day. and you're going to get much more powerful systems. And they may not be called corporations anymore, but they'll essentially be these global systems of incentives and participation, and they'll have more impact than a company ever has, just like Linux.
Do you think they will be governed by local laws and regulations, or they somehow transcend that?
Yes. So yes and no. In other words, every company, the nation still, even in the far future, I think still super relevant. It's always going to happen, but again, you're going to see systems emerge that are effectively distributed and unstoppable, kind of like Linux was, or kind of like Bitcoin is. That are these global systems that are just these super powerful and influential things, and you're going to see more and more things like that. I mean, imagine if Linux, to get an idea of like what I'm talking about, like imagine if when Linux was coming about, it also had a concept of blockchain built into it. That would have been a very, very, very powerful thing, because now you're talking about tracking how many bytes are moving through the system and who moved those bytes and what software moved those bytes and who wrote certain critical algorithms and systems and managed projects. And like, if all of that can be economically tracked and accounted for,
so that the people that contributed it could be compensated for their effort,
or even just simply recognized in some way on some kind of a leaderboard or something, that might be all it takes. And who knows though? I mean, I don't know the details of what this kind of thing will look like, but just there'll be systems like Linux again, and they'll be very powerful and very influential, sort of global technical movements that revolutionize how we interact with each other, or how we get our Uber, or everything. And they're on the horizon, and it's just a matter of putting the pieces together.
Has Blender been on your radar recently at all?
Blender, the 3D tool?
Yeah.
I was playing with that just the other day. It's funny you asked, but
it's interesting because for many years,
yes,
if you're like, well, I don't want to use I don't want to pay for Photoshop, what are my alternatives? People would say GIMP, and then you would try to use GIMP, or I don't want to use 3ds Max, but what are my alternatives? People would say Blender, and you try to use Blender, and you're like, it's just not really up to snuff.
Right.
The interface is weird, and it doesn't work quite the way I was expecting it should. And it seems from what, like, I still haven't dove into it, but it seems from a distance that with each version, at least of Blender, especially now they've got this 2.8 that's coming out now, it's like kind of in a pre-release, that they've solved most of that.
Well, it's amazing. I mean, I was using it the other day, and like, I'm not a professional, so we'd have to ask the professionals. But I'm looking at this thing, and I'm like, it's amazing. It's a huge pile of software that was written without some kind of a corporate structure or whatever. It's amazing.
I mean, they have a foundation, but I don't know. I don't know.
It's still amazing. I mean, it's open source, and it isn't clear as a user of it. It's not clear what the business model is. But
I have some friends in Vietnam that have a visual effects studio, and they actually work on Hollywood films from time to time. And I just kind of saw, again, from like an arm. I haven't.
Do they use it there?
I haven't seen them say a post that says we use, like, this is why we use Blender. I mean, it hasn't been explicit like that. But sometimes when you see people posting over time, you start to intuit. Like, I'm pretty sure that they're using Blender a lot.
Right.
Either because the price of the license at $0 is attractive to them,
really good,
or because like it's actually meeting their needs on a professional level, and it seems to be the case.
Yeah. As I said, I'm not equipped to even have this discussion, but I did use it the other day, and I was all like, this thing's looking really legit, and I think it's great. I mean, I love it. I love that. More open source is awesome for everybody. Can't deny it.
It's funny that you say you're not equipped to. I mean, I believe you. You're not equipped to make that judgment.
I can't review just because I haven't used like any of the professional tools in 10 years.
But yes, like you were the first person to introduce me to TrueSpace.
Yeah.
And to 3ds Max.
Yeah.
while we were still in high school.
Yeah, those
so
awesome tools. I mean, as I said, Blender is better than those tools, but that was 20 years ago.
right.
I haven't used it since.
Again, I haven't really used any of those professionally in a while now myself, but from what I can tell, those tools, along with Adobe's tools, so
Right.
Autodesk's tools and Adobe's tools,
Right.
have suffered from consolidation, where in the case of Adobe, like they bought Macromedia, so now we don't have competition between Freehand and Illustrator,
Right.
and we don't have really competition between Max and Maya.
You know, in that competition, one of the things the competition would do is one of the competitors would say, here's a new creative, cool idea. And they put it in their product. And it may work, it may not. People might like it, they might not. But if they did like it, the competitor had to also build it. Meanwhile, they're both doing that. They're both innovating. But you kind of stop innovating once you have a monopoly. In fact, the major thing that Adobe did in the last few years was all they did was change their business model. The truth is that it's a better product with the business model they have now. I like the subscription that they're doing. I think it's a really good idea. But when I think about the innovation that Adobe has done in the last couple of years, I think about that's their biggest innovation. Even though in the graphics space, like from the research perspective, there's just a tremendous amount of stuff happening with like machine learning and like deep learning and all this, just amazing, phenomenal things. And I don't see any of those in Adobe products really. There's some stuff,
a little bit,
but it's not as much as that. We had what's the word? It's a I guess the best, I'll use the word cornucopia of amazing advances in graphics over the last 3 years. But again, when I think about Adobe, I think, oh, they changed the subscription model. I don't see them like incorporating all this like crazy machine learning.
They changed their subscription model a few years ago, and then more recently they've increased the price of the subscription.
Okay, sounds about right.
And I've been looking for alternatives myself.
Inkscape, GIMP.
There's this one called Affinity Designer and Affinity.
It's a matter of time before there's gonna be an incredible photo editor. There's a guy talking about it right now. So it's for the web. So you just use your browser, and it's a matter of time before that takes over, in my opinion. Like, Google will release one, like a really nice photo editor built into Google Docs, and it'll just be incredible.
Okay, here's a topic that maybe you have some insight on. I've been researching new computers so that I could edit this podcast.
Yeah.
And you have this dynamic where, because I'm doing a lot of traveling, ideally the computer I get is as small as possible.
Right.
For me, actually, the ideal would be a 13-inch.
Okay.
It's big enough that they have kind of a decent keyboard, but still as small as possible. Right. But at that size, you don't get a lot of power.
Right.
Compared to 17 inches. Right. And some people are like, how about you do your editing on the cloud? Why don't you use cloud horsepower?
Right.
And then I'm like, but what about latency?
Right.
And then they're like, but there's a streaming game, something or other, on live or, in the past, and everybody poo-pooed it and then it went away. So,
yeah.
I didn't actually just give you a question there. I just kind of rambled about.
So the way to think about this one is to sort of say, what's the most efficient way to deliver compute to a person, right? And if you're using Photoshop, if you're editing videos, if you're playing video games, latency is part of the subject. But like, what's the most efficient way? Well, when you buy a computer, you're only using it however many hours during the day, and the rest of the time you're not using it. Meanwhile, the CPU is spiking, so occasionally you need the CPU, but a lot of times you don't. Like, you've got all these cores, right? They're not engaged all the time. So it definitely seems to me that the most efficient way to access compute for a person is to rent it. And the nice thing about that is that you could rent 1,000 cores. Just decide, hey, I need 1,000 cores to render this thing because I want it done now. I don't want to even wait 30 seconds. I want it done in 1 second. And the truth is that that's not more expensive, because if you need 30 seconds of processing done, you need 30 seconds of processing. It doesn't matter whether you do it across 1,000 CPUs or one. So that means that the nice thing about the cloud is that you get more compute when you need it and less compute when you don't. And it's going to be cheaper because at night when you're not using it, you're not paying for it. Whereas you're like your current machine, you are, because you own it. So the cloud is more efficient from a compute standpoint. And then from a delivery and latency standpoint, well, the latency is like on a nice connection is like 30, 40 milliseconds, 20 milliseconds maybe. And that's pretty good. Each frame at 30 frames a second is like, what is that? 30 milliseconds. So you're actually able to get like really good latency. Now, in the case of video games, one of the challenges there is that it's really difficult to send video feeds, live video feeds of a video game, because you can't do inter-frame compression. So you can't do keyframes. You can't do any of that because you never know what the next frame is going to have on it. So if you're sending the frame, you have to send each frame compressed as like a JPEG. And you can't do video compression. So, but if you have a fast enough compression, you have a fast enough connection, you could do it. And it could be amazing. If you designed a video game to access like multi GPU CPUs and you didn't have to design that game so it would run on everybody's different configuration, you could just spend time being like, this is the machine we have, kind of like consoles, but bigger. And then you stream it all over the net and you're just renting the machine while you're using it. That could be amazing.
But when you look at, when people are choosing their computer monitor,
yeah,
they're like, dude, that's got more than three milliseconds of latency. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah. So that
refresh rate.
So for competitive games, I think that's true. It's always going to be a thing, but someone could build like a new World of Warcraft that worked this way, that it wasn't all about reaction time, but was a little bit more about something else. Like, in other words, if you design a game around this idea that you're going to have 30 milliseconds of latency and you have these specialized machines and you're going to stream the content over that way, then you could do some amazing things, I think. Now, at the same time, I like having a machine locally. And these tools that we're talking about don't exist yet. So in the current world, everything still is better if, from a media editing and media production and like gaming point of view, it's still better to have everything locally. And maybe always it will.
Here's a
oh, and by the way, you talk about that latency on video games. You still have that latency when you're in a competitive game. You still have all the control latency. You know, it still has to go up to a server and go out to everyone else. The difference is you're just sending more data. More data doesn't increase the latency. The size of the data has no effect on latency. What does is buffering. And the reason why you do buffering is because you have different amounts of data you can send at every moment. It's sort of spiky due to like other people on the network and so on and so forth. But as the pipes get bigger, your latency is going to remain, you know, that 20, 30 milliseconds bounded by light, you know, the speed of light basically. And that'll always be there. But the control latency, in other words, the future to me is absolutely rendering on the cloud. It doesn't inherently increase latency.
Okay, here's a potential optimal workflow.
Yeah.
Edit locally using proxy media.
Using what?
Proxy media. So like low resolution
okay
versions of my footage.
Yeah.
Right? Let's say like standard TV resolution.
Yeah.
In the background, uploading 4K footage to the servers. When I finish my edit, send my edit decisions to the server and have it render the high quality footage with the edits.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, completely. Or you know, that's just how you design the software. In other words, the cheapest place to have the compute and the rendering is in the cloud, where other people can use it when you're not. That's always going to be the most efficient place.
And where it can be upgraded without you having to
right
care about upgrading it.
Right. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to run any client software. So you're going to run some client software, and then you're going to have, again, in the future, you're going to have a lot of the compute on the cloud, and then like some things that need to be less than 30 milliseconds. Anything that needs to be less than 30 milliseconds, you'll do on your machine. So a couple of things that I believe will never fully be solved because of this latency, inherent fundamental latency problem, is music. So if you're playing in a band, you can't. The latency is unacceptable.
You can't jam online.
I don't think you can jam online. People have tried several times, never worked. There are things you can do. You can do GitHub style session creation where you write your baseline, I hear it, or you play a baseline, I hear it, and then I add my part on top of that, and then you hear that. And we've built those kinds of systems before, but and that's fun. That's a cool thing to do, but it's not the same as playing in a band. Playing in a band is awesome. It's like you're all together, you're aware of each other, you kind of know what's happening, and it's meditative and it's an amazing experience. You can't do it online because of the latency. I mean,
you can sometimes barely have a conversation on Skype because of latencies. Right.
Well, the other problem with Skype, I think, is the gaze effect. So the problem is that like you're looking at a screen, and inevitably there's a video of you on there somewhere. You tend to look at that because people.
I saw 2 weeks ago. I saw some news stories about, or maybe it was Intel, doing stuff to like basically they just draw your pupils looking at the person.
Yes. I always thought this would be an awesome project because the gaze problem is like one of the 3 things left that make video conferencing hard. I mean, it's one of those uncanny valley problems where if you're just talking to a friend or whatever in a bar, you can do that and that's great. But as soon as you try to virtualize it, you add latency, you add the gaze problem, and you add like the other things that come up. And then you're in this uncanny valley where it's uncomfortable and weird. Yeah. No one's looking at each other is the thing.
I was I've always been bothered by the fact that even if I'm looking at my conversational partner's eyes, it looks like I'm not, because that's not where the camera's located.
Right. This is the gaze problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was always thinking, well, maybe you could have a dead pixel in the middle of the screen, like at about where the eye level would be on most people.
Yeah.
And put a camera in there.
Or the other idea is put a light sensor in every LED element.
You have a giant image sensor.
Oh yeah. So the only trick there,
there's no lens to focus it, though.
You don't need one if you have an array that big, I believe.
You think?
I don't think so.
I don't know how that works, but
yeah,
I don't know. It seems like you might.
I mean, look, you're taking in a lot of data. You should be able to reconstruct an image.
So this is something that's interesting. That's going to become more and more prevalent and interesting with like photo cameras and also cell phone cameras. You have what they call computational photography.
Okay, yeah.
So you have things where, like, traditionally, if you want to create a nice blurry background in a photograph, you got to have a bigger sensor. You have to have a lens with a large aperture, and that's how you create this blurry background.
Right.
But now you can even Skype now has this blur background, like one button click thing, and it's not as good, but it's only going to get better.
Right. If you can do face and head detection based upon the features of your face, and we've been working on that forever, and we're getting pretty good at it, very good at it. If you can do that, then you can blur the background.
This camera has eye detect focus, where it tracks your eyeball. And then when you take the picture, it like takes a picture.
Right. Yeah.
Focuses on your eyeball.
Cameras will wait until everyone's smiling and have their eyes open before taking a photo.
This has that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Or it's got it doesn't have that. It's got this like selfie mode where when you smile, it takes a picture.
Yeah.
Right. So this kind of computational stuff. I don't know where I was going with that.
Oh, it's just you talk about computational photography where you're simulating all these like effects of what a lens would do, and yeah, it's completely true.
All right, yeah. So like in video conferencing, there's no reason why. In fact, they should have done it a while
Solve
ago.
the gaze problem. It's so subtle that like nobody really wants to like invest in it, I think. But it's in the uncanny valley then, and if people aren't looking at each other, they don't have a good conversation. But
if you've ever been in a long distance relationship, and you're doing a lot of video conferencing, your partner can be like, what are you working on? What are you doing?
Exactly.
And you're like, I'm looking at you.
Exactly.
It just doesn't look like it.
Yeah. Yes, that's one of the problems with video conferencing. The first one is the gaze problem. It's not the biggest one, maybe. The next one is just technology bullshit, like glitches and like things not working and like the connection going down or whatever, which still happens even on like cell phone calls or telephone calls. And then the idea that you're not actually in the same space. So you're in a smaller space. So the idea is like, if you're in a room, that's the main space. If you're in VR, that's the main space. I find that like your brain is only able to be in one space at a time. But in this video conferencing thing, you're both in this little box, even though you're also in this bigger room. So it's this problem of like you're not in it entirely, and when you are, you feel like confined.
In a way,
It's sort of
traditional
this
phone
crappy
call,
virtual box that you're in.
the traditional phone call creates a much more engaging virtual reality than current video conferencing does.
Yeah. Something about that. Yeah, there's something there for sure. I've had definitely immersive phone call experiences, but I've never had an immersive video conference.
No, it's always frustrating.
Yeah,
I mean,
always
it's oftentimes frustrating.
Yes. And no one likes them. No one truly likes them. No one's like, oh, I'll call my friend on the video phone. They're like, oh, I'll call my friend on the telephone and have a conversation. That's fun. But the video calls are not. They're not immersive in some ways. It's not a box you want to be in. You don't want to be in that box. It's something like that.
Furthermore, if you have like a streamer setup where you're using a proper camera and a proper microphone and proper lighting, you can make pre-compression a really compelling image.
Right.
But most people just use their built-in microphone and camera of their laptop or whatever.
Yeah.
They're not normally very high quality.
You know, the Kinect had a video conference mode, had Skype, and it was great. Xbox One Kinect, because I could sit on the couch with my wife or whatever, and the camera would have this intelligent algorithm to pan and zoom kind of as it was going. And that way you'd feel like you were in the space together, because I'd see the people I'm talking to, they'd see us, and they'd see that we weren't engaged in any other activities. And we didn't have a gaze problem either.
But that's a group conference call instead of like a one-on-one conference call.
Yeah, right? but because it wasn't a notebook also or a phone, the camera was far enough away that the gaze problem didn't happen. And you could look at the person and it looked like they were looking at you. It was pretty damn close to being pretty excellent, just on the Xbox. It wasn't like some fancy corporate video conferencing system.
Do you think that when Skype is streaming video, is it doing video compression?
Well, yeah. I mean, the client.
So, like, how's that different than game streaming?
Well, latency is important, right? You don't want a lot of latency in a conversation. So, just like a game, latency is important,
right? But is Skype saying, well, because we need to have intra-frame compression, we're going to, on purpose, have a 1 second delay?
They may do a quarter second. Even a quarter second gives you like 6-8 frames to compress across. You don't want that quarter second in a video game though. Like that's going to be a lot.
Do you know if any of the existing game streaming technologies?
I don't know anything. I don't know anything about their like.
The thing is, like, they keep this. I guess what Google's now announced one.
Yeah,
and it's, as far as I know, like the fourth major one that has been announced.
Right.
Way back, there was OnLive and Gaikai,
right,
which was acquired by Sony, and I don't know if they ever did anything with it.
Right.
And then maybe about a year ago, there's this thing called Shadowbox, which actually you can use to do this like a remote. You can just install video editing software on it if you want.
Oh wow, cool.
You know, so
same with Amazon. You can probably even pull that off.
You can probably use an EC2 or whatever, the cloud, Amazon Cloud, to do it as well. They have, but the thing is, their GPU powered computes are pretty pricey.
Yeah, they are. They're super pricey.
So, like something more targeted towards gamers is at this point going to be more reasonably priced,
right?
Because like I guess if you're using 2080 Ti's on Amazon's cloud, you're probably doing AI or some kind of research or finance stuff that you don't mind spending the extra money.
Right.
But for just me wanting to edit my YouTube videos, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy.
And then now there's some kind of announcement about Google doing it. But when OnLive first came out, everyone was like, "Oh, it's not ever going to work because of the latency." And they're like, "No, it's going to work. Don't you believe you me? Come do this test where we're next door to the server,
right?
Right, and we'll prove it to you."
Right. But I mean, again, they're not wrong. Inherently, you can do it this way. Like from a physics standpoint, you can do it this way. If your internet connection is fast enough, and
did they use in quantum entanglement?
No, because remember that the control portion, imagine the video game is just like 2 pixels on the screen, right? or you're just 2 pixels moving around. Well, that would be easy to stream. Easy to stream as your enemies' controls are. Your enemies' controls are where they're moving their mouse and their keyboard controls and stuff like that. That all has to go up to a central server. That latency is what we're dealing. That's the most important latency, especially in a multiplayer game. Is like, what's the latency of the players? Well, that has to go to the internet and go up to the server and all that. So why not move the entire video frame too? It's not. It's more data.
Well,
yes, it's more data, but like, who cares? So once you have enough space, the game is indifferent to how much data you're moving.
So here's one difference.
The latency is indifferent.
When you're rendering the game locally, when you make an input, your character responds instantly.
Yeah, on your side. Yeah,
on your side
to work to
right
to blow that away.
So at least you have, from the standpoint of like,
you're right.
Are my controls responsive?
Yeah, you're right.
Yes, they are.
You're right.
Now, there might be things where the system realizes that your opponent and you are not where you said you were.
Right.
And then you could have like this jump situation where it tries to reposition you in the world where you should be at this point.
I think we talked about this in Street Fighter. It's called game state replay, where the players get a responsive view of the game, meaning I press punch, I immediately punch, like within a frame. That same for my opponent. The server knows who punched first. And so if it looks like I hit them, but they actually punch first, my character is the one that gets hit.
It's called a rollback.
Yeah, they rollback. Yeah. So that's something that games do, I'm sure, to different degrees. And they're all working really hard to compensate for latency. So you might be right. You might be right that like, if the servers are rendering it, it'll never be as nice as if it's local. That's
in terms of
good
player control.
In terms of feel, it'll never feel as good.
Yeah.
So if you put all the frames through the internet, then you never get to do game state rewind. And why did they do game state rewind? It's because the game wasn't as fun if you didn't do it. But if the server's rendering the frames, you can't do it.
And when you're talking about fighting games, any real competitive action game, up until 10 years ago, people were saying, no, 30 frames per second is not enough.
Right.
It has to be 60 frames per second because that 1/60th of a second matters.
Yeah.
And now people are playing on 244 hertz monitors.
Right.
Even.
So I think ideally, when you're playing an online competitive video game where reaction time matters, the people you play against should be in your region. That's going to be better. But, it only matters so much as it matters to people who play these games. So I don't even know. Can you even play Fortnite on a LAN these days, or is it always up to a server?
Oh.
Like when these kids did the tournament, was it local or was it up to the net?
I don't know anything about Fortnite specifically.
Okay.
But my suspicion is that it's not the kind of game that you can host your own server.
Right. I get that. Yeah.
Because they have ways that they
even though it's one of the most popular games right now, and it is super competitive, yet people aren't complaining about like the fact that they can't run it competitively in a LAN type format. We should find out.
I think
those kids that played the
target audience for it is young enough that that's not really on the radar.
Right. Well, that just goes to show, like if you design games around the limitations, it won't matter. You just admit that the limitations are there and design a good game.
Cool. Well, Dan.
Yes, Thomas.
Thank you for taking your time.
That was awesome
today.
Yeah.
Let's see. If people want to learn more about some of your projects, they can check out
ethics.market and retronyms.com are two of the things. I also mentioned cast.market. But yeah, ethics.market is what I'm working on right now. And then the company that spawned that is called Retronyms. And we have built a bunch of music software over the years.
And both, that has a weird spelling too.
Yeah.
So
RETRONYMS. And then ethics is ETHEX.market.
Right. So if you're interested in exploring some music composition on your iPads, be sure to check out any of the apps by the Retronyms. And if you're into cryptocurrency and are interested in a decentralized Ethereum-based exchange, you can check out ethics.market.
Perfect. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
And we'll see you later.